and join the conversation. I'm absolutely delighted to have journalist and Middle East commentator Nabila Ramdani on the line this morning. Good morning to you, Nabila.
Good morning, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Hey, not at all. Always a pleasure. Look, I've just finished Andrew Hussey's book, The French Intifada. I found what he had to say about the history of the Maghreb absolutely fascinating. But I have to say, linking what I've gleaned from that book with what I'm hearing commentators this morning having to say about an Islamic state running all the way to the shores of the Mediterranean, I have to say, probably like a lot of people, I'm rather alarmed.
Well, and you quite rightly, mentioned what David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain, had to say about ISIS and the threat it represents, not only globally, but also for the UK. And it is very much a justificatory statement by Mr. Cameron. It's actually not that usual for him to talk about general issues. He's very much a pragmatic politician who responds to problems as and when they occur. But in this case, he's pinpointing Islamic extremism, what he calls a poisonous ideology, as one of the major threats to stability at the beginning of the 21st century. And he's clearly not talking about just the UK, but as I said, about a global threat that jeopardizes the stability of his country as well. And this is a crucial statement, not least of all because there has been a movement away from intervention in Western policy, in Western foreign policy, led by Mr. Obama. But I think that as far as ISIS is concerned, there's an international consensus, if you like, that that group has to be stopped. And this is very much what David Cameron emphasized in the Sunday Telegraph. Now, what is useful about ISIS from a Western point of view is that there is no ambiguity about it whatsoever. It's clearly a ruthless, murderous group which is committed to death and destruction. And actually, some academics have labeled it not so much as an Islamist group, but as evilist, because they're so filled with hatred for anyone, Muslim, Christian, or otherwise, who do not fit within their extremist view of an Islamic caliphate. And this situation was far less clear in scenarios such as Syria, Libya, or to a certain extent even Iraq, as we are seeing today. So I think one of the most important components of an effective foreign policy is to know who your enemy is. And Mr. Cameron is making it abundantly clear that he knows who his enemy is in this instance.
I mean, bearing in mind that the old European powers were instrumental in dividing up the whole region that we now think of as the Middle East, I mean, what's the position vis-a-vis that new potential, that caliphate or whatever, and the EU as a body?
Yes, I think, having said all I've just said, I think it's very well to have high-minded words, but in the end you have to know how to act on them. And last Friday there was an important meeting, an EU meeting, where all EU countries pretty much agreed that it would be a good idea to arm Kurdish soldiers to fight back ISIS. But the way they are going to deal with that remains unclear. For instance, you have to, I think that the agreement was that they would send, effectively the EU countries would send often obsolete Russian-style weapons from Eastern European countries to the Kurdish soldiers to fight back ISIS. But bear in mind that ISIS is equipped with sophisticated US weapons which they have taken from the Iraqi army. The Americans spent $25 billion on the Iraqi army, and all these sophisticated weapons are now in the hands of ISIS. So it seems to, be there seems to be an imbalance there, and that EU decision raises more questions than it answers, really. Again, the West finds itself in a position, of, the public opinion might ask who's getting the weapons, who's going to coordinate, the fighting on the ground. You obviously need trained, authorized people to exert that force on the ground. And inevitably Britain, among other countries who have decided to arm the Kurdish fighters, would also be blamed for any, civilian casualties. In my view, I think this is a knee-jerk reaction of sending weapons to Kurdish fighters, and it's not going to sort out the mess. And I'm afraid it's the same kind of short-term logic tokenistic logic, which led to people thinking that in the end, at the end of the Iraq War and the fall of Saddam Hussein, and that signaled the end of all of Iraq's problems. And of course, it didn't. But I think what we should also bear in mind is that beyond the short-term necessity to fight back against ISIS, what is effectively being encouraged by arming Kurdish fighters is the break-up of Iraq as a sovereign entity. And this is by no means a desirable possibility, and it just shows that once again, Western powers are concentrating on the short term without any thought to the disasters which are likely to happen as a result. And it's a prime characteristic of recent foreign policy, I'm afraid.
And is there any chance that this newly elected Prime Minister Ahmadi is actually going to be capable of unifying things, of pulling things together, or is he just another one that's going to be, I don't know, just blown away by the wind, as it were?
Well, I think this is a crucial point, Larry, because any military solution should be accompanied by a political aspect to it all. And I think the resignation of now the former Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is clearly a significant move. He was put under intense pressure to make way for his successor, Mr. Haider al-Abadi, who is one of Iraq's most senior politicians. He has held several high-profile posts since he returned from exile in 2003. And al-Maliki was certainly viewed within Iraq and indeed internationally as a liability. I mean, his corrupt Shia-led government did so much in the first place to foster divisions and hatred between main groups, the Shia, the Sunnis, and indeed the Kurds. And in many ways, ISIS is a direct result of Maliki's authoritarian rule and oppression of Sunnis in particular. So at the very least, al-Maliki's resignation put an end to the political deadlock in Baghdad as the government struggles against insurgents. And the new prime minister has, the backing of the Shia clerical establishment, but also of Iran, America, the international community. And this is very important. Now he faces formidable challenges, and not least of all, the formation of a national reconciliation government to unite his country and to fight corruption. And of course, he needs an effective army, so he effectively pledged to retrain and reform his army, but he's already made it clear that Western help in the form of advising, training, and indeed weapons would be more than welcome.
So do you think, just to sum things up, Nabila, it's inevitable the British forces are going to have to go to war again?
Well, remember that the Iraq War was hugely unpopular in the UK and indeed in the US, and it claimed the lives of 4,500 American troops alone. Yeah. And Obama was always viewed as the president who would end similar interference in the affairs of troubled countries like Iraq. So given the British and American legacy in that country, I think the chances of seeing Western boots on the ground in the next few months are extremely slim.
Right. Nabila, thank you so much for joining us and kicking things off, as ever. Really, really beautifully. Thank you. Nabila Ramdani, they're journalist and Middle East commentator, and we're talking about